Laura had always thought she knew what peace felt like. After years of being alone, after heartbreaks that seemed endless, and moments when she doubted whether happiness would ever return, she thought she had finally found it. She had married Michael, a kind man with a quiet presence, someone who never demanded much and gave much more than he received. Their marriage was calm, comfortable, the kind that others would call steady. But steady was not what Laura had imagined for herself when she was younger. She had wanted passion, excitement, the kind of love that makes your chest ache and your mind spin. Now, in the quiet of Michael's house, she settled for warmth, for safety, and she told herself that was enough. That was until Evan walked into her life. Evan was Michael's son, not a child, not a teenager, but a grown man in his mid-20s. He was polite, independent, with a life of his own, and had been living in his own apartment for years. Laura had only met him a handful of times before, and each meeting had been brief and formal. She had never felt anything more than a distant connection, nothing that made her uncomfortable or emotional. He was Michael's son, and that was the boundary, clear and unshakable. But sometimes life has a way of quietly bending boundaries. When no one is paying attention, it began on a rainy Thursday evening. Michael had been called out of town for a work trip, something about an urgent meeting in another city. And Laura found herself alone in the house. She had been preparing dinner when there was a soft knock on the door. When she opened it, she found Evan standing there holding a book. He looked slightly surprised, perhaps even hesitant, but his polite smile remained. "Laura," he said, "I just came by to return this. Thought I should do it in person." His voice was calm, measured, and something in it made her heart beat a little faster than it should have. Laura took the book, feeling the weight of it in her hands, and nodded. "Thank you, Evan. That was kind of you." She stepped aside, too, let him in, and without thinking, she motioned toward the living room. Rain was pattering against the windows, the soft sound filling the otherwise quiet space. She had never expected him to stay, and she certainly hadn't expected the way the house seemed to shrink when he moved closer. He set the book down on the table, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if the air between them had shifted without warning, becoming heavier, more noticeable. Laura tried to fill the silence with casual conversation. She asked about his work, his apartment, small details she knew from previous visits. Evan answered, polite, reserved, but there was something different in his tone this time. He laughed at the right moments, but not entirely naturally. His eyes, Laura couldn't stop noticing them. They lingered, not out of disrespect, not boldly, but in a way that made her pulse quicken. It was a look that seemed to see more than just her, that made her feel exposed in a way she had never felt before. Not with Michael, not with anyone. Laura told herself she was imagining things. She tried to force a smile to change the subject, but the look remained quiet, insistent, and impossible to ignore. She shifted to talk about the rain, about the house, anything to break the tension. He answered, keeping his eyes on her, and Laura realized that his gaze wasn't just curiosity, was something more complicated, something heavy and uncertain. She felt a mix of unease and curiosity, the kind of feeling that makes you both want to look away and yet can't stop staring. They moved to the sofa, sitting across from each other, and Laura busied herself with making tea. She could feel Evan's presence nearby, the subtle way he leaned slightly forward as if drawn into her space despite the distance. She focused on the sound of the rain, the small clatter of cups and spoons. Anything to avoid the magnetic tension she couldn't name. And yet, each time she glanced at him, his eyes were still on her, quietly searching, quietly intense. She told herself it was harmless, that it was nothing. Evan was a young man, perhaps just lonely or confused or maybe simply lost in thought. That had to be it. But even as she reasoned with herself, the quiet pull between them was undeniable. Laura had never been the type to notice a man's gaze, not in this way. Michael's eyes had always been kind, comforting, the kind that made her feel safe. But Evan's eyes were different. They carried questions that she couldn't answer, thoughts she wasn't meant to know, and yet she felt compelled to try. The evening stretched on, small talk filling the spaces between their silence. And Laura felt a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. It's the kind of feeling that crawls into your chest and refuses to leave. Evan finally spoke, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Laura, I don't know why, but I just wanted to see you tonight. Not just to return the book, but I don't know, it feels like we don't really talk, and I wanted to fix that." Laura felt her pulse race, and she swallowed hard. She could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the honesty, and yet the intensity that made her uncomfortable. It wasn't malicious, it wasn't predatory. It was simply complicated. There was something unspoken between them, a tension that neither wanted to acknowledge but both could feel. She nodded slowly, placing the tea tray down. I understand, Evan. It's good to talk, really." Her voice was calm, but inside, her mind raced. She reminded herself over and over. He was Michael's son, a grown man, a human being with his own struggles and nothing more. It was nothing more. But still, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed in the space of a single evening. The look, the words, the quiet moments they had crossed a line she didn't realize existed. The evening went on, but every sound, every glance, every pause seemed amplified. Laura noticed the subtle ways he adjusted in his seat, the way his hands rested, the small tilts of his head when he laughed at something trivial. It was a quiet intimacy, the kind that forms when two people share a space and a silence that speaks, louder than words. And when he finally stood to leave, placing the book back in her hands, she realized she had been holding her breath the entire time. He smiled, polite, kind, normally let somehow. That smile carried the weight of everything unspoken. Laura walked him to the door, trying to maintain composure. "Thank you for stopping by," she said. Her voice was steady, though her hands felt clammy. Evan nodded, giving her a small, hesitant wave before stepping into the rain. She watched him go, the sound of his footsteps fading, and closed the door behind him. For the first time in years, she felt a restless ache in her chest, a feeling that had nothing to do with Michael, nothing to do with their marriage, and everything to do with that single, lingering look. She told herself she was imagining things. She told herself it would pass. She told herself it was nothing, just a fleeting moment of human connection that had been misread. But deep down, she knew it wasn't nothing. That night, Laura lay awake, in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, the rain now a soft drizzle against the windows. Every detail of the evening replayed in her mind. The sound of his voice, the way he had looked at her, the subtle tremor in his hands when he had reached for the book. She felt a mixture of guilt, confusion, and curiosity, emotions she had not anticipated. She wanted to understand why this had affected her so deeply. Why a simple visit and a polite exchange could leave her feeling unsteady. Laura realized that life had a way of quietly shifting, even in moments that seemed ordinary. A single glance, a single gesture, could carry weight far beyond what anyone intended. She understood, too, that boundaries were fragile, even when clearly defined. Evan was Michael's son, a grown man with his own life, and nothing should have happened beyond that. And yet the evening had felt charged with unspoken emotion, a subtle tension that neither of them could ignore. By the time she finally drifted to sleep, Laura knew one thing for certain: nothing in her life would feel quite the same again. The look Evan had given her, brief, quiet, and yet infinitely heavy, had changed something deep within her. It was a look that promised questions she didn't want to answer, motions she couldn't name, and a tension that would follow her long after the rain had stopped. And though she would try to dismiss it, to return to normal, Laura knew that evenings like this had a way of lingering. They left traces, invisible but persistent, like the smell of rain on warm pavement or the memory of a smile that had touched you in ways words could never explain. Something had shifted, something delicate and dangerous, and Laura was keenly aware that her life, her calm, steady life, would not be quite so calm for very long. After that rainy evening, Laura felt as though the world had subtly shifted beneath her feet. Evan's visit lingered in her mind, each detail replaying in slow motion. She could still see the way his eyes had searched hers, so quiet, so intense, that she had almost forgotten to breathe. She told herself she needed to move on, that nothing had happened and that nothing should happen. Michael was away on his work trip, and for the first time in a long time, Laura realized how quiet the house could be when he wasn't around. The silence pressed against her ears, making her heart beat louder than usual. Every creak of the floorboards, every tap of the rain seemed to echo in her chest. Days passed. Laura tried to immerse herself in work and the small routines of daily life. She read books she had been neglecting, cleaned the house, cooked meals, and even started organizing old photo albums. Anything to avoid thinking about that one look? Yet it was impossible. Every time she sat in the living room, she imagined Evan there, smiling politely, leaning forward slightly, that subtle tension that had made her feel both curious and uneasy. She hated herself for noticing it, hated herself for feeling the stirrings of an emotion she shouldn't feel. Yet she couldn't stop. Evan did not call. He did not visit. He did not even send a text. The silence was deafening. Laura wondered if he had felt the same way she did during that evening. If he had also been caught off guard by the intensity that had briefly passed between them. Or perhaps he hadn't noticed at all, and she had simply imagined the depth of his gaze. Either thought left a hollow ache inside her. She spent nights turning over possibilities in her mind, imagining conversations that would never happen and words that would never be said. She tried to convince herself that distance was a blessing, that he had boundaries and respect, and that her feelings were irrelevant because nothing had truly begun. Then, one Saturday morning, he appeared again. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just softly, quietly, as though he had stepped out of the mist of her thoughts and into her reality. He knocked on the door, his hands in his jacket pockets, and when she opened it, he gave her a small, cautious smile. "Hi, Laura," he said. His voice was calm, measured, but there was a subtle weight to it now. A hint of vulnerability that she hadn't noticed before. Laura felt a flutter in her chest, equal parts apprehension and relief. "Hi, Evan," she replied, trying to sound casual. She stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in. "It's good to see you." She told herself the words were ordinary, simple, harmless. Yet as soon as he stepped inside, she felt the familiar, quiet tension return. It wasn't an attraction she wanted. It was a presence that reminded her of the previous evening, of the intensity of the emotions she had tried to ignore. He looked around briefly, noting the neatness of the house, the rain-streaked windows, the small plants on the windowsill. "I wanted to talk," he said finally, his voice low. "Not about the book, not about anything, just talk. I think we need to be honest with each other." Laura's heart skipped a beat. Honest about what? She tried to steady her breathing. "'Kay?" she said cautiously, gesturing for him to sit on the sofa. She followed, sitting across from him, feeling the weight of his gaze immediately. Evan's hands rested on his knees, fingers intertwined, his posture careful, almost protective of himself. "Laura, I've been thinking," he began, "that evening. I might have misunderstood something. I felt something I shouldn't have, and I don't know why. I felt drawn to you, maybe in a way that was wrong." His words tumbled out, awkwardly sincere, and Laura's stomach tightened. She nodded slowly, listening, because the last thing she wanted to do was interrupt. "It's okay," she said after a pause. Her voice was gentle, soothing, yet firm. "Evan, I understand. And you're right. There are boundaries here. You're Michael's son. I'm your stepmother. Nothing should happen between us." Her words were calm, precise, but her mind raced. She hated that her heart had responded anyway. She hated that she had imagined what could have been, even for a second. And yet, there was a tenderness in his admission that made her ache. Evan looked down, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I know," he said quietly. "I don't want to cross any lines. I respect you. I respect him. I just needed to say it, I guess, to clear my head." Laura's heart softened. He was honest, vulnerable, trying to do the right thing. Kay, that was the man she wanted to see. Not a man who crossed lines, but a man who recognized his feelings, admitted them, and chose restraint. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The room was filled with the soft sound of rain, the occasional rustle of leaves outside, and the quiet thrum of their own hearts. Laura realized that silence could be both heavy and comforting, depending on who you shared it with. Evan finally spoke again, his voice more measured now. I think I needed to understand that these feelings, they don't mean anything. They're just human confusion. And it doesn't have to ruin anything. I just didn't want you to think I was disrespectful or wrong." Laura smiled faintly, a small understanding gesture. "I don't think that," she said. "It's human to feel things. It's human to be confused. What matters is what we do with it. And you're doing the right thing." She felt relief, a quiet sense of pride that he was handling this like an adult. But even with that relief came a pang of sadness, a soft ache in her chest that she couldn't name. Over the next few weeks, Evan kept his distance. He visited less frequently, sometimes only for a quick hello, sometimes not at all. Laura noticed it, felt the absence, and yet she was grateful for it. The silence was safer, even if it left her with quiet, gnawing loneliness. She reminded herself that it was better this way. Boundaries were necessary. Respect was paramount. And yet she found herself thinking about him constantly, the way he had looked at her. The quiet moments of connection, the gentle vulnerability that had made her heart ache. One evening, Michael called to say he would be delayed returning from his trip. Laura hung up the phone and sat quietly, staring at the empty room. The silence seemed louder than usual, and memories of Evan's visits drifted to her mind unbidden. She remembered the warmth of his hand as he held the book, the careful way he had positioned himself on the sofa, the intensity in his eyes that she could neither forget nor name. It was maddening, frustrating, and undeniably human. Then, unexpectedly, Evan called. His voice was quiet, hesitant, but familiar. "Laura, can I come by? Just to talk. I promise it's nothing complicated." She felt a flutter in her chest, but nodded silently to herself. "Okay," she said. "Come by." She didn't know what she expected. Only that the moment would be another test of their restraint. Another challenge to the delicate balance they had tried to maintain. When he arrived, he was careful, polite, restrained. He didn't overstay, didn't invade her space, didn't act as though anything had changed. Yet, in the quiet moments, she could feel the undercurrent of emotion, subtle and controlled. He spoke of his life, of work, of small frustrations, all the while maintaining a careful distance. And yet, the way he looked at her, fleeting, hesitant, made her heart respond despite herself. It was a silent dance of emotion, a game of restraint and longing that neither wanted but both could not fully ignore. As the evening drew to a close, Evan stood at the door again, pausing before he left. "Laura," he said softly, "thank you for listening, for understanding." He smiled faintly, polite but tinged with something unspoken. Laura returned the smile, a mixture of relief and melancholy in her eyes. "Any time," she said. And then he was gone, leaving the house quiet, the rain softly tapping against the windows, and Laura alone with the ache of restrained emotion. That night, she lay awake again, staring at the ceiling, thinking of Evan. Thinking of the way emotions could appear unbidden and impossible to ignore. She reminded herself that nothing improper had happened. There had been no crossing of boundaries, no disrespect, no betrayal. Yet the emotional tension, the longing, the quiet ache it remained. She realized that human hearts were unpredictable, capable of stirring in ways logic could not explain, and capable of testing even the strongest boundaries. Laura knew that this was a test of character, a test of restraint, of honesty, of respect. Okay. She could not let her imagination run away with her. Okay. She could not allow longing to blur the lines that were meant to stay clear. Okay. Evan had been honest. She had been honest. Okay. And together, they had done the right thing. Okay. But right did not erase the ache. It did not erase the moments of longing, the quiet questions, the unspoken what-ifs that lingered in the dark. And so life continued, outwardly calm, outwardly normal. But the quiet moments, the silences filled with memory, were never truly empty. Laura understood that restraint was both a gift and a burden, and that sometimes the most meaningful lessons were learned in moments of longing and emotional vulnerability. The house remained still, the rain continued to fall, and the ache in her chest, subtle and persistent, reminded her that human hearts were never as simple as they appeared. For Laura, the lesson was clear. Honesty and restraint were paramount. But they did not erase the quiet stirrings of the heart. And Evan, polite, careful, and restrained as he was, had left an indelible mark on her emotions, one that would linger long after the rain had stopped and Michael returned home. Laura had spent the week since Evan's visit thinking about boundaries, honesty, and the fragility of human emotion. Each quiet moment in the house reminded her of his presence, the sound of footsteps on the stairs, the subtle echo of laughter, even the way he had once rested his hands on the book he returned. Life had returned to its outward normalcy, but inwardly, her emotions were a delicate tangle she could neither ignore nor untangle. She knew she needed clarity, resolution, and a path that protected both her heart and the relationships that mattered most. The challenge was not in the absence of feeling, but in deciding what to do with it. Michael had returned from his trip, weary and tense from work, but relieved to be home. Laura noticed the tired lines on his face, the quiet weight he carried, and her heart ached with guilt for the restless emotions that had flared while he was away. She knew she could not hold on to silence any longer. It was not just for her own sake, it was for him, for Evan, for the fragile peace they had all been working to maintain. One evening, after dinner, she sat Michael down in the living room. She chose her words carefully, aware of how easily conversations could spiral into misunderstanding. "Michael, something I need to tell you," she began, her voice calm but firm. He looked at her, concerned, sensing this seriousness in her tone. Laura took a deep breath. She spoke slowly, choosing honesty without unnecessary detail, choosing clarity without dramatics. "Evan, he came by recently, more than once, and I felt something confusing. It wasn't anything improper. It didn't go beyond polite conversation. But I think it's important, so nothing remains hidden." She watched his face closely, seeing the mixture of relief, concern, and tension that her words provoked. Michael leaned back, exhaling slowly, trying to process. "Laura, thank you for telling me," he said finally. "I'd rather know than imagine, and I trust you. I need to speak to him, make sure boundaries are respected." The next day, Michael spoke with Evan. Laura was not present, but she imagined the scene vividly. Two men, both grown, addressing their own truths, clarifying feelings, and reaffirming respect. She knew it would be awkward, tense, but necessary. And when she saw Evan again a few days later, there was a subtle shift in his demeanor. He looked calmer, more controlled, as though a weight had been lifted. There was still a quiet tension. In the air between them, a residue of the unspoken emotions. But it had transformed into something more manageable: respect, understanding, and restraint. Laura and Evan continued to see each other occasionally. But now the meetings were structured, brief, and grounded in normalcy. They discussed work, mutual interests, small life events, nothing more. And yet, beneath the surface, the emotional undercurrent remained. She felt it every time he smiled politely, every time he paused to look at her briefly, every time he lingered at the door before leaving. It was no longer dangerous, no longer threatening, but it was still there. Quiet reminder of human complexity and the power of restrained emotion. Laura spent hours reflecting on what she had learned. Human emotions are unpredictable, she realized. They can surface when least expected, even in the most ordinary circumstances. Feelings of longing, admiration, and connection are natural, and acknowledging them does not mean acting on them. True challenge, she understood, is restraint choosing the path that hurts less, that protects others, and that respects boundaries. It was not easy, but it was necessary. She began to notice small changes in herself. She felt lighter, more present, more attuned to the subtleties of life around her. She noticed the way Michael's smile reached his eyes, the quiet comfort of his touch, the ease of their companionship. She realized that her emotions for Evan, though intense, were a reflection of her own humanity. A temporary echo of desire and curiosity that had been resolved through honesty and respect. She cherished it, not as something lost or forbidden, but as a lesson in self-awareness and moral strength. Evan, too, seemed to change. He approached her with calm politeness, a measured warmth that made her feel respected. There was no awkwardness, no tension that threatened propriety. Only a quiet understanding that human emotions can exist without being acted upon. He was learning, as she was, the importance of boundaries, of self-control, and of choosing what is right over what is easy. And in that shared understanding, there was a subtle, unspoken connection, a bond forged through honesty and restraint rather than passion and desire. One evening, as Laura prepared dinner, Evan stopped by briefly to drop off a package Michael had ordered online. Their conversation was short, polite, and entirely mundane, yet it carried a subtle warmth that neither could deny. As he turned to leave, he paused for a moment, looking at her with a faint smile. "Thank you, Laura," he said quietly. "For everything." She nodded, her own smile gentle, knowing that the acknowledgement carried more meaning than words could capture. It was gratitude, understanding, and mutual respect all wrapped in a single moment. Life continued. Slowly, steadily, outwardly normal but inwardly rich with lessons learned. Laura realized that restraint does not diminish emotion, it elevates. It shapes it and teaches the heart to navigate complexity with grace. She thought of the nights she had lain awake, haunted by longing, and understood that those moments had been necessary. They had tested her, revealed her capacity for honesty, and prepared her for the responsibility of navigating human relationships with integrity. Weeks turned into months. Laura and Michael's marriage settled into a comfortable rhythm, enriched, not by absence of tension, but by the honesty that had cleared the air. Evan became more independent, more aware of his emotions, and more respectful of boundaries. Their interactions were courteous, pleasant, and grounded in shared respect rather than desire. The ache that had lingered in Laura's chest gradually softened, not disappearing, but transforming into something quiet and reflective, a reminder of human fragility, curiosity, and moral choice. One quiet afternoon, Laura found herself reflecting on the entire journey. She realized that the most meaningful choices are often those that require the greatest restraint. It would have been easier to ignore boundaries, to indulge fleeting emotion, to chase curiosity at the expense of relationships. But choosing what hurts, less choosing honesty, respect, and integrity had created a foundation stronger than any fleeting passion could provide. She felt proud, not because she had resisted temptation, but because she had recognized her own emotional complexity and acted with care. Evan remained a part of her life, though in a controlled, safe way. They shared polite conversation, occasional visits, and a mutual understanding that some connections, no matter how intense, must remain within proper limits. And in that understanding, Laura found peace. She no longer feared the ache of longing or the confusion of intense emotion. She had faced it, acknowledged it, and made choices that honored both herself and those around her. The house felt different now. It was lighter, filled with quiet comfort rather than tension. Rain no longer carried the memory of longing, but the sound of it brought a gentle reminder of lessons learned. Laura understood that emotions are not always meant to be acted upon, that restraint is not weakness, but strength, and that the heart can ache even when everything is handled correctly. Michael noticed the change in her. He saw the quiet confidence in her demeanor, the calm in her interactions, the peace that radiated from her presence. He did not ask questions, did not press for explanations, and Laura did not volunteer them. It was enough that the trust between them had deepened, that honesty had replaced uncertainty, and that love, in its quiet, steady way, had grown stronger. Evan, too, seemed transformed. He approached relationships, including his bond with Laura, with newfound maturity. He recognized the importance of boundaries, the value of honesty, and the strength required to resist fleeting impulses. Their connection, once charged with intensity and confusion, had evolved into something far rarer. Mutual respect, subtle warmth, and understanding without expectation. It was a connection that honored the past but allowed both of them to move forward. Laura often reflected on the journey, recalling the moments of longing, the intensity of emotion, and the subtle tension that had once filled the house. She realized that those moments had not been wasted. They had tested her, revealed her capacity for empathy, and strengthened her moral compass. They had reminded her that human hearts are unpredictable, fragile, and capable of intense emotion even when reason demands restraint. And so life continued. Laura, Michael, and Evan each found their own balance, navigating emotions with care, honesty, and respect. The ache of longing persisted subtly, a quiet undercurrent, but it no longer dictated their actions. It was a reminder, a lesson, and a testament to the strength of character required to choose what hurts less. Laura smiled quietly one evening, watching Michael read in the living room, hearing the soft hum of the rain outside. She felt content, grounded, and deeply aware of the lessons she had learned. She understood that emotions are neither right nor wrong, they simply exist. What matters is how one responds, how one chooses, and how one honors both oneself and those around them. Evan's visits continued occasionally, calm, respectful, and grounded in ordinary conversation. No boundaries were crossed, no emotions acted upon improperly. Yet in every